From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Dee. Welcome to Thursday night, the end of our week, for the start of your weekend. No doubt. Plenty to get to this evening. Looking forward to a big debate as well. And also love to know who do you think's winner and loser of the week. Tell us on the socials. Now, as always, I love pointing out the difference between this mob when they were in opposition, the standards they demanded, and that Australians expected when they got this government a couple of years ago. One of the constant refrains of the now Treasurer when he was in opposition was that the previous government was one of the biggest taxing, if not the biggest taxing of all time.
They've taxed more than the last Labor government did. They've taxed more as a proportion of the economy in total, adjusted for inflation and per person as well. On every measure, they've taxed more, borrowed more and spent more than the last Labor government, but delivered much, much less.
It was their version of saying that fiscal responsibility. The Labor Party often has the same message, they just rebadge it. They put new lipstick on the same old pig and often voters fall for it, and then eventually, a couple of terms later, they realise this was the wrong way to go. Well, perfect example of that is the numbers that we saw today that show this government is the highest taxing of all time. It is also the highest spending, or close to the highest spending. Have a look at this graph. This is for all government, be it state and local, that's the green, the total, which is the red, but have a look at the blue in the middle. You can see there that the federal government is currently taxing way more than the previous government did. You know this because, of course, they absolutely steadfastly refuse to do things like cut petrol taxes, on top of the income taxes, the bracket creep, all of the things that we talk about here, but seemingly don't matter to too many others. I'm glad it matters to you because it certainly matters to me. And what about their spending habits? Well, again, same source. The red is total, the green is state and local government that actually end up spending more, but of course the GST revenue that comes from the federal government is the reason they end up spending more. But have a look at that blue line. Last time I checked, that is a little higher than it was previously, let alone before that, let alone a generation before that, let alone back into the Howard days. And this is something that this government is addicted to. It's not just spending each and every year, it's permanent spending that they lock into the budget. As populations grow, that spending increases. And when you're in a surplus, that's okay, but as soon as you start to go into deficit, guaranteed locked-in spending, well, it pushes you deeper and deeper into deficit. Now, again, this government most likely will find a way, thanks to the mining revenue and this taxation, to be able to say they're in a surplus. But the expectation structurally about where the Australian budget is that, according to the intergenerational report, we will go into deficits for the next 40 years. And they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So the government does need to find a way to supplement its income, but in my view, it needs to do something to cut its spending. Now, I'm not going to complain about spending like superannuation guarantees for people who are on paid parental leave. But what's $200 million locked into the budget today becomes $250, $300 and so on as the population grows. Equally, when they turned around and put millions of dollars in as guaranteed support payments on top of the wages of aged care workers. It starts as this big a number and then it grows and grows and grows. Perfect example of this is the NDIS. Now, these policies always start as something nobody could possibly disagree with, but also no one has a plan to pay for them. Now, increasingly, Australians will say that they care about debt and they care about tax, but the second anyone moves $1 in the Australian budget, people start to set their hair on fire. And while it is nowhere near $100 million, it's nowhere near $1 billion in structural spending, plenty of people have understandably seen examples of how the government spends money on itself, on its own luxuries, like Tony Burke, as he was called by Chris Kenny, or, of course, plenty of other names which have come around for him, like Flight Centre Burke, I think is a good one that Ray Hadley had today. And it's worth pointing out again, for a 4-day trip to the United States, this bloke cost us the best part of $60,000. Now, for some people, that's an entire year's wage. To the people at the front end of the plane, they don't care. Remember, this government increased the number of staffers in every parliamentarian's office millions and millions of dollars forever baked into the budget because they had to deal with the pressures of social media. These are the people who give themselves, completely independent, give themselves the highest pay rises in 10 years, far from what you've been experiencing or I. But as it was with Stephen Miles and being caught just bald-faced lying, if you want to reintroduce trust to Australian politics, and again, this was one of the many promises that have never come true of this government, because the snout in the trough is always more comfortable than when you're on the opposition side of things and you're pointing out how many snouts are in the trough, and one of the reasons why you're annoyed is because your snout is not in the trough. This government, when asked about Tony Burke's expenses, now again, they want you to talk about Peter Dutton paying his own way to go to Perth for a birthday last week. But this was federal government ministers who all promised to do better than the last mob, saying it's completely okay that a bloke went to the United States for 4 days, took a staffer and cost $60,000.
Oh, look, I don't pore over the declarations made by other ministers, to be frank. You know, I saw that there was a story in the paper about it. I didn't dwell on it.
So much of our defence, of our trade, of our national security depends on these close relationships that we have with other countries, and it does require overseas travel. That's what Minister Burke was doing.
But as Jane Hume quite correctly pointed out, that's not his job. He's the arts minister, among other things. And again, there's something good about a relationship and always being stronger and closer to the United States than China, but come on. At what point does anyone get pulled up on this? Or is the assumption that the media is so friendly to them that this will just be a yesterday's story, one that's only mentioned in the pages of the Australian newspaper and mentioned in Sky News primetime, and thus, according to this mob, completely ignorable? Another broken promise was, remember this one, from the Finance Minister and apparently Deputy Prime Minister, according to some that are disgruntled by the new Gang of Four that is running the country right now, that being Chalmers, Wong, Gallagher and the Prime Minister. No different than, of course, the kitchen cabinet Gang of Four, which Kevin Rudd put around him, and didn't that end oh so well? Well, this is what she had to say about jobs for the boys.
We've announced a review of the public sector board appointment process. This is really to end the culture of jobs for mates. We want to change the appointments, really important appointments across the APS, often well paid as well, that ensure that people actually get appointed for what they know, not who they know, which is a bit of a change from the last 10 years.
But then, within the first 12 months of this government, the Trade Minister decided to appoint a mate, and by who you know, this is about as who you know as it gets. Remember that a bloke who ended up in a trade portfolio in San Francisco representing Australia in the United States is a former Labor senator, whose mate is Don Farrell, who of course made the appointment. An independent board had already picked somebody for this job, and it was a woman who actually applied for the job. The bloke didn't even apply for the job, and the lady who was supposed to get the job ended up having to train the bloke who had no experience in the job that should have been for her. But another example about jobs for the mates and how they're able to continue a life outside of government while working for government at the same time, as long as it's in service of the political outcome of the Labor Party, well, it all has to do with whom this government appointed to have a look into supermarkets. The Albanese government is trying to follow the successful politics, nasty politics as it was, but successful politics of pretending that despite the fact that they have very serious roles in the economy, it's all somebody else's fault. Now, their suggestion is that it's the supermarkets themselves that are price gouging. That's the view of the unions, that's backed up by the ABC. And of course, that is the real problem in Australia with the cost of groceries. Not at all things like petrol tax, not at all things like trucking taxes, not at all the cost of power to keep the power on in your suburban shops, which costs way more because this government's gone from the system that works to the one that makes them feel good. And the person who they appointed to have a look into how all of this worked is a former Labor MP, Minister, in Dr. Craig Emerson. Now, he at one point in time actually had responsibility for the shambles of a policy that was Grocery Watch. The Grocery Watch system where they were expecting a website to update what everything was worth, but obviously they weren't able to keep the data up to date, so the whole thing collapsed. Instead, their policy now is to give a couple of $1 million to a third-party organisation to do exactly the same thing. Because every idea, no matter how bad, no matter how discredited, if it's a Labor idea, it sticks around like a bad smell forever. But back to the jobs for the mates bit here. Now, Dr Emerson, who, yes, is well and truly qualified to have a position on competition policy and all the rest of it here, but of course the reason he got the job was because he is one of the mates. He's one of the old boys. He's one of the mates of Albo. Now, what's interesting here is that despite the fact that he has been given responsibility by this government to talk about things inside the economy, he's still allowed to free range and give very political opinions while working for the government at the same time. You see, he gets to be former politician and commentator at the same time as active participant in decisions that are being made by the government. He maintains a column in the Australian Financial Review, and he hits as hard as nasty Nikki Savra and all the rest of those who want to change the subject from the performance of this government to the responsibility of everyone else but this government. Just this week, he was screaming about the need for there to be, the past couple of weeks I should say, cuts for the Reserve Bank. And before that, he turned around and said about the Dunkley by-election that it set up Labor's 2025 win. Geez, it must be good to have friends who can both work for the government and commentate on behalf of the government outside. But of course, as Bronwyn Bishop says, one rule for them, one rule for everyone else. And we all know the piece of work that Stephen Miles is, the Queensland Premier, but today's going to take the cake. He's had a terrible week. Now, of course, he's the one who was laughing about youth crime, despite the fact that he definitely wasn't laughing about youth crime, despite the fact that he was laughing in response to a question about youth crime. You know that he was caught red-handed after this text message was published on Channel 9 about a text message where he was telling a fellow Labor MP to get up in the middle of question time to change the subject. He was asked a question about it in Parliament and said, "No, nothing to see here. I didn't do that." Until, of course, the photo came out, which caught him red-handed, which meant he said this.
I wish to update the House and advise that I, as the member for Murrumba, did text the member for Palmerston during question time, which was the subject of the member's question. The text message was from some time prior and I did not recall it at the time. I therefore wish to correct the record and apologise to the House for the error.
So the reason it was an error is because he didn't remember what happened. But then, of course, once he went outside the Parliament and he's trying to fight for his political survival and to try to obviously tell the people of Queensland, you can trust me, despite the fact that he is somebody who, at the very least, unintentionally misled Parliament, when we all know that he intentionally misled Parliament because he thought he could get away with it. His answer in the Parliament was, oh, look, it was a busy time, I couldn't really remember anything. But then he could remember everything when he went outside the Parliament.
As I've indicated, I made a mistake in answering that question. It was a very busy question time. Remember, that's the question time we extended, where there were lots and lots of questions. I answered that one too rapidly. I made a mistake. I've apologised.
No, you just didn't tell the truth, but you can remember the question time, just not what happened in the question time. They expect you to be treated like a mushroom, kept in the dark and fed the diet of mushrooms. Well, it takes another turn today in the behaviour of Stephen Miles as the bloke who's trying to spin himself as the next generation, but really is just a new face on the same dysfunction and problems that are the Queensland government and have been now for the best part of a political generation. They're trying to go for their fourth term in government, but one of the reasons why that may not, and fingers crossed won't be achieved, is because of youth crime. Now, you know the story of Vilene White. Vilene was killed for doing nothing other than going back to her car in a shopping centre to make sure that it was locked. Her little granddaughter saw her stabbed before her very eyes. Somebody's been charged, but of course the youth justice system means we're not allowed to say much more than that. Well, today, Vilene's family was in the Queensland Parliament. David Crucifulli, the alternative and hopefully future Premier of Queensland, was asking questions on their behalf.
2 weeks ago, Victor White said the Premier only came to my door for one thing, to make himself look good and point scoring. Is Victor White right?
Victor, of course, is the husband of Vilene, the man who should be tonight getting ready to go to bed with his beautiful wife of many decades. Instead, she is not here. The out-of-control crime problem is one that the Queensland Government has responsibility because to keep its people safe is a central responsibility. Remember how many times they said that about the COVID pandemic? Well, here was the Premier's response. Remember, the family is sitting in the gallery in the same room where he's saying this.
I can assure the House that I visited the White family in good faith to pay my condolences and to express my sorrow for that awful murder. I have since reached out to them and offered to meet with them again at any time that they would like to.
So let's put it back on the family. That the family who just last week had the funeral for their mother, wife and grandmother, maybe they didn't want to meet with the Premier at that particular time. Again, another question on this issue raised by the opposition.
2 weeks ago, Victor White said the police do the best of their ability, but the government doesn't back them up. Is Victor White right?
Again, he's sitting in the room. He is the victim of crime who no longer has his wife. This was how Stephen Miles behaved in the Parliament.
I can also assure the House and the Queensland community that this government supports our police, and we will do everything the police service tells us they need to keep our community safe. Well, we've demonstrated that we will deliver that for them. I will not, in this House, politicise an awful tragedy. I never, ever will.
What a lowlife. They are sitting in the same room as him. The sheepish, I'm not going to look, I'm not going to look. And then has the balls to turn around and say that it's the opposition who's politicising it. No, it's called responsibility. Now, this bloke won't take responsibility when he's caught red-handed lying. And if he won't take responsibility when the victim of crime is sitting in the gallery with their family, what does it tell you about this bloke? What does it tell you about the government that he leads? Again, let's play that again, because I want you to pay attention not just to Stephen Miles and what he says, but look at all of the cowards around him. How many of them are looking at the bloke who's lost his wife?
I can also assure the House and the Queensland community that this government supports our police, and we will do everything the police service tells us they need to keep our community safe. Well, we've demonstrated that we will deliver that for them. I will not, in this House, politicise an awful tragedy. I never, ever will.
It's despicable. It truly is. Queensland, how many times can I say it? But I mean it more every time I say it. You get an opportunity to send this bloke and his team packing. Please, please do it towards the end of the year. We'd like to talk about other people's money, because that's the attitude when it comes to the way that governments like to spend your money. You work incredibly difficult. You work multiple days a week before you start to earn money for yourself. Otherwise, you're just working for government to pay the endless taxes, the taxes that are now at record high levels. But of course, if you work for the government, then you're part of their overall political strategy of being able to hold on to a permanent majority. And working from home is something that we know the public service is particularly enjoying at the moment. Despite the fact they all should be back in the office, they all should be focused on their job. Instead, they just make sure that they log on 10 seconds after they're supposed to and they log off 5 seconds before they're supposed to. And then, of course, don't contact me, I'm at home. Well, the Victorian public servants are going to get a special cost of living payment for staying at home, not having to get into their car to pay the petrol taxes, not having to pay the parking fines of going into the office. Victorian public servants are going to get $5,500 plus. The negotiations are that you can work from home for just 4 days a week. And then there's the example of the bloke Jerome Weimer. He is one of the absolute favourites of this government. He was the COVID commander at one point in time, blaming removalists and screaming about people crossing the border, all of that garbage. Well, then he ended up as one of the chief people trying to implement the Commonwealth Games. The Victorian government obviously was never actually planning to deliver, but he made an awful lot of money in his first job with the government, an awful lot in his second most high-profile one, and even after the Commonwealth Games was killed off by the relevant minister, now Premier, and the former Premier, Daniel Andrews, Guess who makes money when the job runs out as well? Our old mate Jerome. He got a massive exit payment after the Commonwealth Games were cancelled. The Allen government has revealed a couple of weeks ago, not just this Monday, that it could not reveal the details of his exit plan, but it's believed to be worth $160,000. This is a job that he would have held for less than a year or about a year, but $160,000 when it's done. Why? Because it's in line with standard termination deals in executive-level bureaucrats. The bloke, who earned more than $500,000 a year as the chief executive of the Victorian Organising Committee, was one of a number of staff members to secure a termination package, according to the evidence that's been given to a Victorian parliamentary inquiry about the cancelled event. He formally ceased employment with Victoria on Victoria 2026 on October 31, more than 3 months after the event was scrapped. So he was paid to organise a thing that was never going to happen, and then he got paid for 3 months, and then he got paid after the job wrapped up. It's understood that he is set to collect at least 4 months of his salary as part of the contract. Now, is there going to be an inquiry into any of this? Well, that's what the Liberal Party and several other crossbenchers wanted in the Victorian Parliament, but no. The Greens got together with Animal Justice and the government to say, no, there will be no inquiry into why this bloke got paid that much money for a job that he was not in that very long for. But it's other people's money, right? So it doesn't really matter. Now, for most of the past week, people have been trying to guess about who is the spy that ASIO boss spoke about last week. The former MP who, he said, had sold his country out and his party out. Well, last night we got a name, not from ASIO, but from former Labor power broker turned DLP member in the Upper House of Victoria, Adam Somyurek. He used parliamentary privilege to make this accusation.
President, we are also told by Mr Burgess that MP in question was close to a former Prime Minister and tried to compromise the former PM's family. Our next task is to investigate characteristics such as history of disloyalty, character, financial and psychological situation. Acting President Anthony Byrne certainly ticks all the right boxes here.
Now, of course, I have no idea if this is true, and it's worth noting that Mr Somyurek does have a history with this bloke. Somyurek admitted in Parliament that he had an axe to grind against him. Somyurek says that he was the one who set up cameras that showed Somyurek branch stacking on 60 Minutes. ASIO has denied Mr Byrne is the traitor. He has not commented. There are local council elections happening in big parts of the country, but there's one local council area that I want to talk about because it may be a forerunner to what might be happening at the next federal election, and it is the Brisbane City Council. Today there was a meeting of the Greens, unsurprisingly, the one in the left, still protesting for Palestine, Labor in the middle, and the current mayor who's going for another term, that being the Liberal representative. But the Greens, because there are no Teals operating in South East Queensland, have been able to make the most of an awful lot of people moving up from Melbourne and also from Sydney who bring left-wing politics to central Brisbane. There are 2 state MPs that represent a big chunk of the council area that will be voting in the next little while. There's also a collection of federal MPs who overlap exactly with the same area, which means it's worth noting here whether the Greens may end up as the next Lord Mayor of Brisbane. God help you, Brisbane, if that is actually the case, but among others who notice that this is an issue is Anthony Green over at the ABC, and he says the Brisbane by-election is going to be, understandably, quite significant. Now, I've resisted talking about this for much of the week, but give me a moment here because this has a lot of grey. It's not quite as black and white as it seems. And that, of course, is the situation involving the Australian female soccer captain, the Queen of the Matildas, Sam Kerr. Now, before we say anything here, I've loved the idea that my little girls are watching the Matildas like I have watched football as a kid. Asha has got a poster of Sam Kerr in her bedroom, so I understand the role of her as hero. But one thing that we are all starting to notice right now is about, with the growing professionalism and attention on female sport, is some of the automatic attitudes people have to when a female athlete gets in trouble in the same manner that a rugby league player would, a cricketer or anything else. Now, as you know, the accusation from the police in the UK via the Sun newspaper is that an officer was referred to as a stupid white bastard after, apparently, she'd thrown up in the back of a cab and the police were called to deal with said matter. But some of the hot takes are just piping hot garbage, including this one by I think, SBS commentator who wrote in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age today, if Sam Kerr was a straight white housewife, would she stand accused of racism? Now, there's a bit here, but let's go through it. My heart refused to believe that the woman who admired my pregnant stomach in 2019 and said she couldn't wait to have kids, who was so humble, who would fetch coffees for her teammates while I interviewed them, could do such a thing. She's fronted anti-racism calls and championed Chelsea's No to Hate campaign, which aims to fight against all forms of hate, including racism, homophobia, sexism, religious intolerance. She is proud of her Indian heritage and knows what it's like to be discriminated for her gender, race and sexual orientation. We jump forward a couple of paragraphs. We know little of the detail, but we know this much. A white male police officer is accusing a lesbian female footballer of Indian heritage of racism. We go on. Not every cop is bent, you'll say, but if this is the Met's modus operandi, referring to previous issues of racism inside the force, perhaps Kerr would have been just fine in the taxi on that January night if she was a straight white housewife. Now, it's up to a court to decide whether there is a punishment here. Like most Australians, I'm not entirely sure that this is something that should be ending up in a courtroom, but you can say that for many things that people end up in front of courtrooms for. The reality here is you can feel two things at the same time. A great love of how professional women's sport has not only become something that girls want to play, but everyone wants to watch. And to also say that with that higher standard that people try to apply to other professional sports people, it applies to the female sports stars as much as it does the men. And also at the heart of this, it seems to be, do you believe that you can be racist to a white person? If that's the inference of the article, that you cannot be racist if it is a white person, well then for obvious reasons we're all going to disagree. Now, have there been greater institutional issues towards people of colour? You betcha. Can we show you the laws on the book that say it's illegal at certain points in our time to be gay? Yes. Have there been times when people who come from different ethnic extractions are treated poorly by the people who claim it to be their country? Yes. But if the reality is that you want to be paid like a professional athlete, like somebody who is a leader of people in their country, to have statues made because of your sporting achievements, then what comes with it is an extra social responsibility. Unpleasantness towards the police at the very least, let alone a form of racism, which this is, will have to be adjudicated by a court. But you can love the Matildas and feel weird about what has happened here at the same time. Commenting on the issue does not mean that you are suddenly trying to claim reverse racism or don't understand the importance of Sam Kerr in many little girls' lives. I do, because that's exactly what the case is for my eldest daughter. We've had to talk about this in the past couple of days, and I've said that's what she's been accused of, and we'll wait and see whether it is proven. Whether the case actually makes it any further than where it is now, we'll all learn together. But the idea that if you have anything critical to say, then somehow you are excommunicated from the How Good Are the Matildas party. No. It doesn't work like that. The downside of fame is that people will make the most of your indiscretions. The downside of professional sport is that they expect you to behave better than anyone else. Whether you think that's fair or not, that horse bolted a long time ago. Quick break, back with more. Lots to talk about here on Paul Murray Live. Who do you think's the winner or loser of the week? Jump onto our socials. Dave Rubin will also talk to us about a big week in the United States, but I've got two very special ladies joining us next, and I look forward to that debate here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you so much for watching. Very excited that the wonderful Christy McSqueeny is joining us, of course, the PR counsel and our dear friend here, resplendent in pink.
Oh, look, International Women's.
Oh, of course, yes.
Here it is. Got to give it the mention.
Happy IWD, kiss the ring, all of that business. Yes, enjoy yourself. Kristen Abram also joins us now because I said when we saw her at the Dunkley pub test that whatever happened, regardless of whether she was going to get up or not as the MP for the Libertarian Party, she was going to become a long-term guest on this show, and that experience starts now. Kristen, lovely to see you, mate. How do you feel a week after not having to beg for votes?
Let's be honest, I'm glad that it's over.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me, Paul. Thanks for making good on your word.
No, I'm not one of those. I mean, Christy, obviously you've run for Parliament too. It is a ridiculously exhausting experience. In a by-election, it's a much shorter period of time, but you know the experience where it's months and months and months.
It's very tight. Kristen, welcome to the club. But as you can see, you can have a long, wonderful career on Paul Murray Live afterwards.
Yeah, the second dream job.
Absolutely, and it's even better.
Yeah. That's the plan.
Look, by-elections are really difficult for candidates. Yes, it's a shorter amount of time, but you have the attention of the nation. I ran for the 6th most marginal seat in Australia. It's the traditional bellwether seat of Western Australia, which happened to be the target for the election in 2022. It was the one everyone watched. And so I do have some understanding of what Kristen and Nathan Conroy and Jody Bailey have gone through in this period.
Well, Kristen, I'll just ask you one more thing about the experience, because I think a lot of people would be interested to know what it's like, right? Which is, you know, you put the whole effort in, you want to meet as many people as possible, you knock on as many doors as possible. But it is amazing how many people just say, nah, I'm team red, I'm team blue, I'm team green, I'm never, that's the way I've always voted, I'm not voting anywhere. When you're trying to introduce them to another option, did you find that hard, or was that part of the excitement?
It depends what you define as excitement, but it's just part of the battle to ensure that people are opening their eyes and seeing what's in front of them and that there are other options. And change doesn't happen overnight. I say that to so many people. So I will continue to use that to invigorate me. But excitement, at the end of it, I was definitely sure that my feet were very, very sore.
All right, well, we have a Liberal, a Libertarian. They will agree on some, they will disagree on much. Now, let's talk about what I said at the start of the show, which is that this government, despite saying that they were, you know, the last one was so terrible because of how much tax they raised and how much they were spending, guess what? They are taxing more and they are spending almost as much. No giant surprise. Now, they'll put it down to population, but there is something fundamental that I want to deal with here, Kristen, which is government is addicted to spending. And it's addicted to spending because, let's be very honest, it's what at times the electorate demands. Now, no doubt, many a dinner party or barbecue say, oh, mate, of course we should cut back. But then the second you take $1 away from somebody else, they start to set their hair on fire. And this seems to be, for want of a better term, a real intellectual cancer at the heart of our politics.
Absolutely. Jim Chalmers actually said, we know that there are more good ideas that can be funded. I'm shocked that they actually think that the government is the answer to the problems that we find ourselves in.
Sing it, sister.
They are the reason why we're here. Sorry, Paul?
Sing it, sister. Keep going. Sing it. I'm cheering you on.
Yeah, they're the problem. They're the reason why we're in this situation now. We should leave the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirits to be able to bring us out of this. They are who got us here, and the government's red tape and regulations has stifled our businesses being able to thrive in this economy. So the fact that he thinks that the government funding stuff is the answer, no, the government is the problem. Their consistent government price gouging is why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, Christy, it's this thing where, and again, you've seen this from so many different angles, right, with the PR Council, you know, inside government, outside of government, all the rest, and knocking on doors, which is the politics that is so lazy that if you try to move a dollar from here to move a dollar there, let alone even take the total dollar out of spending, cuts, black and white, all the music. You know how it goes.
Yes. You can only cut rich people, though.
Yeah,
now,
of course.
Can't you?
Of course.
And of course, I was stunned during the tax cut debate to learn that in the United States, States, you don't kick into the top tax bracket until you earn $700,000.
Yeah. For us, it's 180.
That is incredible. And I make the point through this debate, 10 years ago, Joel Fitzgibbon, and of course we're talking about the Fitzgibbon family today and condolences to that, but 10 years ago, he made a point and he stood up, actually he said on ABC Radio, on Radio National, that there are people in Sydney earning $250,000 a year who are struggling to pay their mortgage because they bought at the top of the market. Tolls are $80 a week. There's no infrastructure out there in Western Sydney. He was decried. It was class warfare on Joel Fitzgibbon, the member for Hunter at the time, by the Labor Party. So they like to identify who's rich and who deserves having things that they've worked for take it away, whether it's your superannuation or, a bit off your share portfolio or whatever it may be that you've worked for.
Well, of course, strength and love to Joel and his family. It's impossible what he's going through right
absolutely.
now after the death of his son today at Richmond. Let's talk about Sam Kerr, because as I mentioned at the start of the show, I don't want to be one of those bandwagoners that's going to turn around and scream, she must be pushed out of football, all the rest of it. But conversely, with professional sport and the attention and the popularity that means, you can become a corporate ambassador, you become, literally a hero to little girls. The fact that my beautiful Ashes got a poster of a Chelsea, as just an average soccer player. I get the role that she plays, but some of the hot takes really come down to an essential idea here, Christy, which is, do you think you can be racist to white people, right? Now, I remember on this show 10 years ago, Dee Madigan, regular at the time, and I would still count as a mate, said, no, you can't be racist to white people, right? Because white people are the long-term oppressors, blah, blah, blah. But I thought that, again, and maybe it's a Gen X thing, about the post-race situation, is that we all interact as we are now, not whom we have been in the past. Again, a court will decide what it decides, and whether a court should be involved or not, that's another debate. But it really feels like that's the first question before we get into the what should happen to her and how should we react to it all. What do you reckon?
First of all, I think it's a real storm in a teacup, to be honest. I understand that the police officer felt bad, offended, but is that the worst thing that happens to him in the course of his job as an inner city London police officer? Is it? What's his motivation for pursuing this significantly? That's the question I want to ask. A couple of throwaway lines that he finds offensive, I don't think that's worth going after her for.
But
so
again,
I question that.
Cam. So we'll see body cam.
Yeah, we will, and we don't know enough about it, right? I just question why it's come to this significant proportion based on the actual facts of the case rather than who she is.
Yeah, I mean, alleged,
exactly,
all that business.
Exactly.
But anyway, Kristen, what do you think about, and again, some of the hot takes in and around all of this, that somehow if you think that anything other than being named Governor-General is somehow some way of attacking women's sport, which seems to be part of it, if you've got any opinion outside of, nothing to see here. What do you think of it?
I'm honestly so sick that society continues to try and put us in boxes of you're pro this or you're anti this if you have an opinion. Like, we're entitled to our opinions about these topics. And in terms of what's happened, yes, it was an inappropriate comment, let's be completely fair, but also, you read the article out before that she had allegedly, been sick in the back of the cab. And if a drunken statement is going to potentially land you 2 years in prison, then there is the potential that I would be facing a life sentence myself.
No, it's absolutely fine. But again, alleged, all that. We'll see how it goes. Now, before we get to winners and losers of the week, I need to bite my tongue nice and hard here, because I love that on Australian Airlines you've not been allowed to fly with your pets. But my dear friends at Virgin, and I do love my dear friends at Virgin, they are now letting pets into the cabin. I saw some social media posting of one Ms McSweeney who said, awesome, wonderful, as somebody who constantly has to fly to Perth, I'd like my chihuahua with me. Okay, convince me, because I'm in the seat next to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Why do I have to put up with your dog?
Well, Paul, I am an excellent lobbyist. I'm good at winning people over, and with the addition of a very small dog, I think I'd win you. You'd be patting that dog by the end of getting off in Perth.
Yes.
We'd probably go down.
But you're nice. There are going to be terrible people who bring their dogs on.
Personally, I don't know why they've done it. In fact, I actually do know why they've done it. If you want to make money in Australia today, make it about pets or babies.
Yeah.
Or if you're a restaurant, add on a wedding surcharge. Anything that makes money today is about pets and the way we live and our pet ownership and all those intellectual arguments we can have about where the market's going. And I think that's Virgin's motivation here.
Well, correct, right?
But I love it. I don't know why they've done it, but I am all in. You've got me, Virgin.
It feels like a CEO who's going out the door going, this will be fun, funk, run, see you later. Kristen, how are you going to feel if there's a puppy in front of you, a puppy behind you, and you just want to sleep?
Well, I think if we were talking about society in general, if you had two aisles on both sides, you had an empty seat with a baby next to that empty seat on one side, and you had a puppy on the other side with an empty seat next to it, 9 times out of 10, we're going to choose to sit next to the puppy, not the baby, let's be completely honest. So I think Virgin, in a free market, is doing an amazing job. And if you want to go with a different provider, go with a different provider. That's your choice. You're barking mad if you're complaining.
Well, you've got two choices, really, only. So.
But see, OK, so the beautiful Peter Credlin just sent me a text, right, of Hendrix, right, the most beautiful little puppy in the world, and going, he's a virgin man. All right, I'm not even going to fight this one.
You're losing already.
The Libertarian says, you do you. The puppy lovers have got together. I know when I'm beat. See, that's a well-trained man,
You'll be carrying the dog onto the plane.
Bloody oath I will be. Thank you, ladies. Do appreciate it. See you all again very soon. Well done, Kristen. Look forward to seeing you again very soon as well. All right, quick break. Back with more. The great Dave Rubin from the United States. See, as soon as Peter said, she knows how to break me. She knows how to break me. Love you, Dale. Love you, Hendrix. One of our favourite people in the world is the great Dave Rubin, the Rubin Report, available on Rumble. It is a great show, and he's a wonderful bloke. Joining us from the Free State of Florida is, funnily enough, Dave Rubin. How are you, great man?
What are the chances that you'd be introing me and I'd be sitting right here at the exact same time? It's wild.
How does this happen so damn regularly? But I'm so glad it does. Now, let's talk about Trump and the Supreme Court. Now, everyone would know by now, 9-0 in his favour. States can't, surprise, surprise, bounce people off the ballot. But it's the reaction to it that I love. Like, lefties truly thought that there was a way to kill off Donald Trump that wasn't beating him in an election.
This is a 5-4 ruling on part of it.
This is actually a 5-4 decision.
It's 5-4.
Trump will take this, spin it, spread the misinformation, disinformation on it, so it's a win for them.
He's on the ballot, and voters will vote, and he looks like he's headed to become the Republican nominee for president.
You can't save a people from themselves. If they're determined to re-elect him after he organized that insurrection, then there's nothing to stop the people from doing that.
Yeah, the reaction really is the interesting part here, because everyone knew, or at least everyone with their head on straight, knew that the Supreme Court was not going to allow for certain states to take him off the ballot. I don't think we all knew it was going to be 9-0. I think that's quite good for the future of democracy. But watching the talking heads of MSNBC and The View and the rest of them, basically saying this is an assault on democracy because the Supreme Court did not do what they wanted the Supreme Court to do, it's the height of irony, it's the height of ridiculousness. These people, the problem with so much of the modern left is they want to burn down our institutions when they don't do what they want. And when the Supreme Court does do the right thing, they just will at the same time tell you that it's an illegitimate branch or they're governing from the bench, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a good day in America, let's put it that way, because if Trump is not going to be the president, it should be done at the ballot box on all 50 states. It should not be done any other way. And that really, I think most Americans know that. Short of like the people with the true Trump derangement syndrome, most of them happen to be on MSNBC or The View, most people actually do accept that.
Well, also, when we talk about the ballot box, I love when the arguments of the 1990s are used in 2024 going into, a quarter of a century into a quarter of our way through the 21st century. That's a long way around to make this point. But Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, he's talking about how, we need to do everything we can to fight against rules like voter ID laws.
Right to vote is still under attack. And that is why the Justice Department is fighting back. That is why one of the first things I did when I came into office was to double the size of the voting section of the Civil Rights Division. That is why we are challenging efforts by states and jurisdictions to implement discriminatory, burdensome, and unnecessary restrictions on access to the ballot. That is why we are working to block the adoption of discriminatory redistricting plans that dilute the vote of black voters and other voters of color.
I just find this stuff so patronising, and also it's so unrealistic. Like, we just went through a system where everyone was told to stay inside. Like, big government has had its way in the past few years, and the idea that now black voters couldn't possibly find a way to identify themselves when they needed to buy anything on the internet or go anywhere.
Paul, you're not going to believe this, but I've seen black people on planes. And you know what you need to get on a plane? Yeah, it's true. Almost every plane ride that I've ever taken, there's been several black people on that plane. And that means that those black people were able to attain identification like every other American. You're right, it's completely patronizing. I would argue it's actually racist. By the way, you know, in certain states, Nikki Haley, when she was governor of South Carolina, so this is 10 or 12 years ago, she said she wanted people to have IDs to vote. The left went crazy, so she said, okay, the government will fund it. If you cannot get an ID for whatever reason, the government will send a car to your house, will take care of everything. And I think she told me about 20 people took them up on that offer. So this misnomer that there's swaths of people who happen to be brown and black that cannot get IDs is completely ridiculous. I would also tell you that, you know, I lived in California, where you do not have to show an ID to vote, which is completely absurd. Then I move here to the free state of Florida, where I do vote, and you have to show an ID. And I can tell you as a voter, not as a pundit, just as a regular American citizen, I can tell you that when I left the polling station in Florida, you feel much more like your vote matters, it counts, it's secure, and everything else, as opposed to just wandering in to a school that's closed that day and telling them, oh yeah, I'm Dave Rubin and I live here and let's do this. So the problem is the Democrats don't want faith in the system, so they do everything possible to undermine that faith.
All right, Super Tuesday, no giant surprise about the results. But there is something that I wanted to ask you as a guy who, you know, no doubt is going to have his issues with Donald Trump after trying to back in Ron DeSantis, but still obviously clearly prefers him over Joe Biden. Do you, no, I mean, you know, Trump and Biden steaming away, both going to be the nominees. But do you pay much attention to the not Trump and not Biden vote? Because the great fear, of course, if you're a Democrat, is that X% won't turn up. If you're a Republican, X% won't turn up. It's sort of like Nikki Haley is the physical embodiment of the, yep, I'm not turning up.
Yeah, well, that's why I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could play an interesting role in this election, especially if he decides to take over the Libertarian Party. You know, everyone thinks we have two parties in America. We've got more than two parties, but we have two major parties. But then the Libertarian Party is also on all of the ballots. So they have ballot access, which means that if he took over the Libertarian Party, then every single person, in essence, he'd be the third name that everyone would see. And he, I think, would take away a bunch from Trump because he was more hardcore against lockdowns and all of that. And that's what a lot of the base likes. So I think he could take some from Trump. Now, he is also an ex-Democrat. He was a Democrat 4 months ago, so he could take some from Biden as well. That would be interesting. Now, I don't know that he's going to make that move with the Libertarian Party, but you're also right that a certain amount of people right now, and I think you can really feel this even leading up to Super Tuesday, there's very little momentum behind this election right now. Everyone feels like we're just getting a rerun. Everyone feels that, I mean, across the board, everyone feels that Biden is too old. But Trump is also 77. We've done this before. Does anyone really believe that either one of these guys are going to be the one to walk in and fix all of our problems? I don't think most people think that.
Enjoy many of those beaches in beautiful Florida. We love you, man. Talk to you soon. Dave Rubin.
You got some pretty sweet ones in Australia yourself, my friend.
I noticed in Sydney today there was a significant step taken in a court case that may well end up invalidating like $30,000 worth of COVID fines. Now, this is great. It's a good step towards logic, but where were the people arguing this case when they were being handed out? I remember those of us who had our issues with our COVID fines feeling rather lonely at the time. let alone those of you who, of course, decided to do whatever the heck you wanted to do with your own body. That's our show for tonight and for the week. Thank you very much for watching. I can very happily say the West Tigers are off to a wonderful start in rugby league because we've got a bye. Go Yankees. See you Sunday.